We're going to move on next to our next speaker, who is again pre-recorded. So Elysha Rei is the Public Programs Officer at the Queensland State Archives. She is a cultural engagement specialist and also a visual artist, and she's going to talk about engaging with archives, community programs in practice at Queensland State Archives.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands in Meanjin, Brisbane, which I'm presenting from, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and the traditional custodians on the lands in which the conference is being held in person, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and I recognise their continuing role as knowledge keepers in relation to their traditional country. I also extend that respect to all First Nations people joining us today. Next slide. So when you're talking about engaging with archives, let's firstly look at what this word means in the first instance. According to the Oxford Dictionary, engaging is to be charming and attractive. Next slide. When you Google the word archive, however, you might see a few images like this. Our repositories lined with stacks of bundles, registers, and boxes. Next slide. Static, inanimate, undiscovered, potentially unappealing to the wider public. Images of archives that show items literally kept behind closed doors, wrapped up, rolled up, and shelved in dusty travatroves. This perception of archives relates to Sir Hilary Jenkinson's concepts of archival theory published in his Manual of Archive Administration in 1922. Next slide. Postmodernist theory developed at the same time as technology, according to Lane and Hill. It challenges this static notion of archival documentation, suggesting that it is a fluid and unstable construct, which is affected by those who create and use records. This postmodernism has challenged the Jenkinsonian theory of archives, which traditionally saw archival practice as an act of passive, impartial service which constructed uncontested reality, and whose authority was authenticated by the official nature of written truth with the record. Next slide. So when we talk about the traditional value of archives, it has really resided in the importance of the informational content of the item rather than its aesthetic form. Next slide. Echoing Ketelar's sentiments in his 2003 Archives and Manuscripts paper, being digital in people's archives, Queensland State Archives has seen a change in its function, from being the state's archive, serving authority, to also servicing the people. State Archivist of Wisconsin, F. Gerald Ham, in 1981, collectively terms this the post-custodial era, where we are expanding the identity and the purpose of archives away from the traditional idea of custodianship. Next slide. According to Brakel, the archives can serve as a platform for identity construction at an individual and community or cultural level. A record's original purpose, documented in history, has infinite potential for future users inside and outside of the archive. Next slide. And this brings me to the engagement team, a team of individuals with skills in galleries, curating, digital content creation, communication, and community engagement. Sitting within access and engagement at Queensland State Archives, this team have been successful in a series of programs and projects that have transformed the value of archival materials beyond primary resources to tools of community engagement. Next slide. Today, I'd like to share several case studies of community engagement in practice: our Memory Lounge program, the Regional Touring program, and our Creative Races program. Next slide. Firstly, the Memory Lounge is a multifaceted program. It is a dementia-friendly space, a public program delivered on-site and regionally, and is also a series of actions that have enabled QSA to qualify and maintain its status as a dementia-friendly organisation by Dementia Australia. Next slide. The lounge is located in the QSA reading room, which is open to the public, and anyone is welcome to use it. It's inspired by mid-century designs and also used Dementia's Australia environmental audit and fact sheets for creating a dementia-friendly space. So it features things like furniture with high backs, armrests, and two-toned colours. There's a differentiation of the planes of space, meaning that the walls, the floors, and the furniture all contrast in colour. There's no glass in the framed pictures to get rid of reflections, and we've used cushions, lamps, and fake plants for an archive for creating a warm and inviting space. Next slide. Dementia Friends program is a part of Dementia Australia. Its aim is to have all communities create a safe and supportive environment for all people living with dementia. Queensland State Archives was the first Queensland government organisation to be accredited as a dementia-friendly organisation 4 years ago now. Next slide. The Memory Lounge public program welcomes groups of people living with dementia in the community to share in a group conversation sparked by photographic records. Within the group, each member looks at the same image, igniting memories and stories that connect with the past. Pictured here is Juanita Hughes. She is the Dementia Australia advocate who lives with frontotemporal dementia. When I met with her earlier this year, I shared an image with her of this bottle tree. And instantly she was brought back to being a 12-year-old girl living in Roma, sitting in her bedroom and looking outside the window to see a bottle tree that looked just like this. And you can see from the look on her face that just that one image that she connected with was able to create that beautiful moment of nostalgia. Next slide, please. This Memory Lounge program model has also been used as a tool for assessment by Griffith University's medical humanities students. These students are doctors in training, studying a course in aging and dying. They learn how to set up and facilitate Memory Lounge sessions for senior community members, which still use QSA records to spark those conversations. It is very much an intergenerational exchange between these young doctors and the senior community members, but also with many doctors having been born and have their families live outside Australia, it's very much an intercultural exchange as well. These sessions have been delivered in regional Queensland, so there's also been a moment of city versus country exchange too. Next slide, please. The second case study is the regional touring program. This is a program that connects galleries, museums, and historical societies with digital, exhibition, and interactive touring packages developed by Queensland State Archives. This image here is of Living Colour, an exhibition in a box concept, which was displayed at Outback Regional Gallery in Winton. Next slide. It's a very simple idea, colouring black and white and sepia photographs to bring them to life. The colorized image is displayed alongside the original black and white image, and all the colorization was done by David Dart. Next slide. Simple panels of images, all the same size, are packaged in a box with a tour manual, install instructions, and ready to hang. This is an install shot at the Mount Isa Regional Gallery. The exhibition is quite nice because you can actually not include all the images for smaller spaces, but also galleries can add in personal items for their own collection to connect with their communities. Next slide. Another exhibition in the box concept we have was with Toad versus Beetle. This is an exhibition about the story of the introduction of the cane toad in Queensland in 1935. Now, pictured here is a photo of Ground Zero, the very first cane toads to be introduced in Queensland. And the photo behind it is the very site where they were released. Next slide. Information panels alongside photographs and cartoon graphics of toads and beetles, the very pests they were introduced to eradicate, but however, unsuccessfully. We partnered with locations where the first cane toads were released in North Queensland. So this is a shot of Ferrymead House in Bundaberg, which is now on permanent display. Next slide. This exhibition also extended in a display at the Cairns Museum to also include original records on display and some taxidermy cane toads. The Cairns Museum also added items from their own collection. Next slide. In addition to this exhibition was a digital interactive game around the cane toad story, but also including the history of other invasive flora and fauna species in Queensland. Developed by QSA, this was inspired by the retro video game Space Invaders. However, the characters are instead plants and animals that are invasive species. Players use their mobile device as a gaming console, connecting to the platform, which is hosted on a website and screened on a TV or a projector. Next slide. Invasive species on the screen are eradicated by correctly answering questions about invasive species in Queensland. Participants can also upload photographs of invasive species they've found in their communities, and this is shared on the gaming website. And as you can see between the two photos, it's got quite an intergenerational appeal. Next slide. The next project was also inspired by retro games and is Queensland State Archives arcade games Pac-Man, inspired by Pac-Man, and Copper, inspired by the game Frogger. So using architectural floor plans as the layouts for the gaming interface, 19th century inspired characters host the game, which are free to play and have 1 or 2 player options. This is a shot of the installation at the Brisbane Airport Domestic Terminal, which was there for a couple of years. Next slide. Hilda is another digital interactive game using a short throw projector, which has touch capability, and is mapped onto a framework that resembles a futuristic record player. A series of discs each contain various photos and images from the collection. Players can place the disc onto the table, which brings up a search menu for browsing through the content. Hence, it is a historical image library discovery assistant, or lovingly known as Hilda. Next slide. The final case study I'd like to share with you is our Creative in Residence program, which was initiated at Queensland State Archives in 2018. Pictured here is visual artist Don Davis, who spent time at QSA in 2019 researching records around the preservation of the wet tropics in far north Queensland. Next slide. Working alongside one of the engagement team members, Alinta Kraft, pictured here, Donna created a body of work for exhibition, including this touch table interactive, which was enabled to embed a series of records that were used in her creative process. We have quite a small exhibition space at QSA, so this digital interface expands the content that people can engage with and allow us to put more records into the space. Next slide. Donna created an animation of an endangered species walking through the repositories. However, don't worry, it was all digitally created, so no repositories were harmed during the making of this. On the left-hand side is a close-up of that home screen of the touch table interactive, and you can see it features one of the maps from our collection. Next slide. The Creative in Residence program first began with Matt Mawson, an artist and an illustrator who was discovered during our research surrounding Queensland's watershed year of 1989, when Joh Bjelke-Petersen was last in office. In 1989, Matt Mawson was actively creating posters and protest materials, and these cultural items were featured in an exhibition surrounding the release of the 89 Cabinet Minutes. For the residency, we gave Matt Mawson access to these minutes, where he responded to the decisions and actions from this moment in time, much like what he did in the 80s. Next slide. He spent 2 weeks set up in the foyer, engaging with visitors and making sketches that he would then take home and create a digital artwork with. It was a visual commentary on the Cabinet Minutes that he was inspired by. The series of drawings were then displayed with relevant Cabinet Minutes underneath. His work created an accessible medium to digest what was sometimes difficult topics uncovered in the minutes when Joe was in power. You might think that that image there of his cartoon looks a little bit like COVID, but it's in actual fact about HIV/AIDS. Next slide. Dr. Jason Nelson was another creative resident from December 2018 to February 2019. His residency culminated into a display of installations and artworks in the foyer, all inspired by the materiality of records. Looking at the aesthetic appeal of handwritten documents and photographs, one of the works Jason created was a touchscreen kaleidoscope, where viewers could drag their hands over the screen and records would be manipulated into geometric forms, rotating in a tessellated pattern of handwriting and photographs. Next slide. During a tour behind the scenes, Jason became very intrigued by a catalogue card holder sitting redundant in one of the storerooms. During his residency, he successfully turned this into a musical instrument. Wiring each drawer within the cabinet, visitors could sound different notes each time they pulled out the drawer to see what was inside. Next slide. Even the Memory Lounge visitors found his works quite fascinating. And one of his digital works from this residency made its way onto the William Jolly Bridge in the Brisbane CBD as a nightlit projection. The most recent artist to work in the archives was Elysha Rei, a Elysha Rei artist, poet, jeweller, researcher, and curator. Her project included a studio visit to her creative space in Yamundi on the Sunshine Coast, where this image was taken. Elysha is a multidisciplinary artist, a constant gatherer, a collector of lost and found, and storytelling is an important part of her cultural heritage. The residency involved research into her very confronting family history, involving her mother's murder file and cultural trauma embedded in her grandmother's documentation and treatment as an Aboriginal woman. The residency resulted in a show featuring beautifully handmade objects in jewellery, textile, and mixed media, which found poetic healing for herself and those who visited, through trauma with themes of identity, belonging, memory, abuse, and collective trauma, but ultimately about survival. These case studies presented today also featured alongside other parts of the engagement program, including workshops and events targeted at various audiences, including school holiday kids, school students, academics, historians, and the general public. So speaking about creative and social practice, the program firstly began to change the value perception of records and archives, both for QSA and those who use them. Beyond their traditional use as a record of decisions and actions, and subsequently a primary resource, records hold the value of community connection, social and cultural history, and creative potential beyond the traditional uses of historians. We wanted to use archival records as a mechanism for not only sharing memories, but also creating new memories through the very act of engaging with them. Secondly, we wanted to reach new audiences that had never even considered using an archive before, or perhaps misunderstood the difference between a library and an archive. A big part of the process was becoming accessible and understandable through initiatives like behind-the-scenes tours, participating in Brisbane Open House, and offering Accessing the Archives 101 type workshops. New partnerships were also formed with non-traditional stakeholders. Dementia Australia for the Memory Lounge, for instance. Our local next-door neighbour, the Kyabra Community Association, which we continue to partner with to deliver First Nations calendar events. And other GLAM sector peers across the state in museums and galleries who supported our regional program to the display of exhibitions and interactive projects. One of the biggest partners in the regional program has been the World Science Festival, who took the Place Invaders video game to various locations, including Chinchilla, Toowoomba, and Ipswich. Thirdly, there is also, Thirdly, there is also a cycle of continuous development, finding new ways of working, new people to work with, and new ways of delivering to different audiences. An example of that right now is our Memory Lounge program is expanding to a regional offering, especially considering the last couple of years with COVID pausing it all together. We're partnering with a small team in our Department of Communities to package a downloadable memory lounge experience for members of the community to learn how to facilitate them to their loved ones while still using images from QSA's collection. Next slide, thank you. So in practice, the roadmap to this model of community engagement started with building the right team. A curator and a public programs officer were brought on board, both with GLAM sector experience in museums and galleries. The team grew again to include members with digital engagement experience, with skills to build programs in VR, AR, animation, and graphic design. Communication skills in social media have also been crucial. Next, we had to understand our audience positioning. We recognised that many we wanted to target didn't have high brand awareness of QSA. People would often confuse us with the State Library in Southbank, who also have a historic collection of Queensland history. Our goal became brand awareness and differentiation in the sector. However, we had a lot to learn from our GLAM peers. The Memory Lounge program is inspired by the National Gallery of Australia's Art and Dementia initiative. Artist in residence programs are also in place in museums and galleries, offering a model to develop in the archives. We wanted to change the value perception of archives and demonstrate how records can be used in unique and creative ways. We wanted to connect with audiences that may not traditionally use archives at all, and look at records beyond their historical value to also include their materiality, their social and cultural currency, and their potential for storytelling. A big part of increasing the scope of audience was to create programs that are accessible and inclusive. This meant changing the physical space to be dementia friendly, which accommodates physical and cognitive challenges, creating workshops and programs that were aimed at children and families, and working with artists to make the content in records that may be confronting or traumatic accessible through the aesthetic appeal of an artwork. And lastly, to share what we're doing in conferences like this with the hope to inspire more opportunities to grow the access and engagement of archival records. Reevaluate constantly. What can we do better? How can we grow even more inclusive and accessible? And keep moving. Keep learning from mistakes, taking risks and trying new ideas, making archives more engaging, or returning to that definition from the start, making them more charming and attractive. Next slide. You never know what or how a connection will be made. Take this example of a comment we had on an image from one of our photographs uploaded online in our Home Sweet Home collection. It staggers me that this photo contains the beginnings of what would become such a large part of my childhood. I rode a BMX without a helmet, learned to ollie a skateboard while mum bought groceries from Woolies, walked with my grandfather. I even met Santa. Our car got serviced in the background of this photo. I've been through this frame thousands of times and can't stop looking at this amazing shot. Thank you so much to whoever looked after these camera film rolls and put the time into getting this online. Now, listening to that, you might be already thinking there's this extravagant image in your mind of what this person is referring to. But if I share the next slide, this is what they were talking about. So I wanted to demonstrate that even an incredibly simple, seemingly mundane archival photograph like this can create a moment of nostalgia and a connection to place and demonstrates direct engagement with a community member. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. I think Laura probably stays online and, Elysha stays online. Do we also have Laura online? No, maybe not. And of course, Kate. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for a really inspiring and interesting session. So many ideas about how we can be more charming and attractive. But not only that, I mean, I got a lot about how these case studies, these instances are really being used to touch on collection building and archival literacy and a whole lot of other things as well. I don't think we have any questions online. Oh no, all of you people out there, quick, get typing. I'm sure there are questions. I'd like to throw firstly to the audience to see if there are any questions. I have a couple.
I have a question.
You have a question, please.
For Elysha, is she still here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
So we're really interested in looking, in fact it's on my required business deliverables for this year, to look at a creative collaborative program like yours that you're running. And I'm interested in, do you pay the artists and how much do you pay them? Where do you find the funding for that program? And, you know, what kind of resources are required for the artist to be, to having a creative artist in residence location that you're building?
Great question. Firstly, yes, we absolutely pay our artists. We use the National Association of Visual Arts Code of Practice for recommended artist fees, and we set a project amount based on an estimate of how much time and the scope of deliverables that they might have for their residency. So is it that they're just doing the residency, engaging in the space for a period of time, or do they also have an exhibition outcome that is expected of them as well? The funding that we had for that was from operational expense with our engagement budget, so we're very lucky to have the support to push forward with this idea and be able to pay artists directly from the engagement budget. But that's not to say that that's the only source of funding you could look at. There might be other grants and fundings available in the visual arts that you might be able to assist artists in applying for with support letters and in-kind support and so forth. In terms of the resources required, each artist had very different needs. Definitely archival assistance was part of the big deal. So we had archivists on the team who were helping to research things in the collection for instance, Melissa Stannett's family history. She worked quite closely with community and personal histories to search for her Aboriginal heritage and records around that. With Donna Davis, she became quite closely involved with our preservation team and was interested in the instruments that they used for documenting climate change within repositories, and that actually made its way into her vinyl exhibition as well. With Matt Mawson, it was assistance with accessing those cabinet minutes which had already been digitised and having them that way. And in terms of the team roles, it was about somebody who could liaise with the artist, guide them along, maybe act as a bit of a sounding board, and then have the skills to install an exhibition at the end as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question actually about resourcing, and I mean it's sort of hard to ask, but it's sort of what, across the board, what sorts of resourcing do each of you have to devote to this, and then we'll come to questions from the floor. Kate, do you want to go first? What sort of...
Oh, what kind of resources? Yeah, so there's me, and then I have a communications officer, and we also produce the Premier's History Awards each year, so 30% of her workload is dedicated to one major program. I have a programming officer, and she also supports the digital communications team, digital communications officer. So they work a lot in conjunction, and the programming officer also has multimedia skills. So she does the video, any video production, photography, that kind of work, and she also works internally supporting other programs that we might run, such as the Hamer Awards, and some of the grants. We also do media around our grants and awards program. So that's 2 staff members. And then I have a 3rd staff member who is a specialist in more innovative data-driven applications. So building one-off applications that help penetrate the collection.
Yeah. Thank you. And Laura or Elysha, would you like to make any comment about resourcing?
At Monash, it's just me doing all this. So there's only 4 of us in the team, and I started working on it while I was a placement student in July last year. And yeah, I've just taught myself how to do it. We don't have any specialists in any of this. yeah, I hadn't hosted really much on social media, even in my personal life. I just figured it out as I went along. So that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah. Elysha, you talked about building a team.
Yeah, absolutely. Engagement team has an incredible group of people with highly specialist skills and knowledge. So there's digital engagement officers with skills in communication, social media, videography, animation, graphic design. We've even been able to explore technology with VR and AR and exhibitions and so forth. There's one public programs officer who sort of coordinates events, workshops and exhibitions in that realm, and two archivists as well, which are very helpful with research, but also taking up roles with Memory Lounge and volunteering as well, sort of spreading their wings in that sense too.
Thank you. Okay. We might move to the questions from the floor. There was one down here. Carol? Yep.
Just before I ask my question, I'm going to promote the National Archives who are hosting the Waterhouse 2022 exhibition, which has a Donna Davies multimedia piece in it. So pop across the road and check it out, and boost my visitor numbers. I'm going back to the creative, in residence. I'm going to ask a really boring management question. What about the security and kind of management of people outside of the organisation into the collection areas and things like that? We have to meet some of these things, and I'm just curious about what approaches are taken elsewhere.
Yeah, sure. So when we've had artists like Matt Mawson set up in the foyer, that's a public space. We do have 24/7 security and somebody on the front desk and security near the foyer. So he was set up and then was able to sort of work independently once that was all done. Other artists who weren't sort of on show, so to say, if they were requiring assistance with doing any sort of research in the repositories, they were always accompanied by a team member and would be escorted both in and out of the building. And artists like Donna and Melissa, they actually did a lot of research at QSA and then took that home and did their making in their own studios.
Thank you. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Bird from the University of New South Wales. This question's for Laura, just sort of a little bit of follow-up on Catherine's question around resourcing. Obviously, I know there's just you doing it, and I guess I was just wondering a little bit, you touched on this briefly about the time component, and I guess I was wondering whether part of your strategy did sort of assess that as to whether it was sort of you've had to take away from other duties to do this particular social media. And I guess I was interested as well because you've chosen to go across 4 different channels, and I guess I was wondering in the future whether you would assess as to whether you continued across 4 channels or whether you were, looking at different spaces and that sort of thing as well.
Well, the second part of that question, most of what we post across the 4, except for YouTube because it's its own thing really, we just really post the same stuff. Because it's mostly just photos. We post some extra stuff on Instagram with the stories, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. We are looking at maybe doing some more different types of messaging on Twitter in terms of the what we're doing sort of stuff, because we don't think that'll do as well on Instagram because it's so visual. But with the time, it's a bit interesting because I only came into the archives in September last year, and there were just the 3 of us, but our digital archivist came back from maternity leave, so there's 4 of us now. So it's, I started doing this, so I can't really comment on, taking away from other things that we were doing. But I did most of the planning at the start of the year, so I don't spend a lot of time on it now. I just sort of check on it as things go up. I schedule several weeks in advance, so it's not taking a lot of time out of my day-to-day activities, though that'll change a bit in the next few months as I'm planning for next year. But yeah, because I only came into the archives at the time we were starting to do it, I can't really say what it's taken away from, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Did we have any questions online? One? Would you like? Oh.
This question is from Jeanette Pelosi. It's for Laura. How do you think social media engagement has changed priorities in collection management, such as listing and digitisation at Monash Archives?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again? I just got lost on the live stream.
Sorry, just one sec. How do you think social media engagement has changed priorities in collection management, such as listing and digitisation at Monash Archives?
So a lot of what we're posting is already digitised. We've got quite a database of digitised images. We are digitising anything that we come across when we're doing accessions if we think they'd be interesting on social media. But in terms of broader digitisation, because we don't have a data, like our access management isn't accessible to everyone, it's not really a priority to digitise things to make them accessible right now, apart from on social media. And we're also not a collecting archive, we're technically a corporate archive within the university. But I mentioned clubs and societies where we found them, so that's sort of changing some of what we're prioritising and looking for to bringing into our collection, even though we're still not technically a collecting archive. But I don't think it's changed much right now. We're still very early stages. We're just building our audiences and it'll change as we go along. Hope that answered that question.
Are there other questions from the floor? Can I ask one last one, which is how do you, if you do, measure impact? So Laura talked about kind of getting a following and those sorts of things. They're the kind of the clear things that you see immediately with social media sorts of things. But with some of the other engagement activities, what is it that you measure to see are we successful or not, or what should we change? We might start with Kate.
So yeah, we do a measurement report every month that I look at, and we measure engagement. So we don't necessarily. We record how many posts per platform, and it's a rough estimate of between 80 to 100 per month. And I measure the engagement, so that is interactions, comments, and shares. So they've got to literally engage with it in order for me to see it as true engagement. I don't measure reach because it's off the charts and it's meaningless.
And how do you measure some of those multiplied?
10,000, 20,000. Yeah. I mean, it's also like how a number is going to be meaningful to you as a manager, and you have to determine what measurement is actually going to help you consider it a success. Measurements that we used to do, say 5 years ago, where it was about reach, were just irrelevant because they were so big. But engaging, I can see straight away. So if we go, for example, from 5,000 engagements a month to suddenly 2,000 engagements a month, then my question to my staff is why? What happened? If it goes from 5,000 to 10,000, I want to know which posts went viral, so I can keep an eye on what content is getting a response and what was it about that content. It just helps me as a manager keep on top of what's trending.
Yep, that's great. Laura, did you want to comment, or Elysha? Laura first.
Well, I guess where we're different because we're little is that we do look at that reach number because we're not getting the thousands and thousands. If it is up to the thousands, that's really good, and that shows that it is getting across the platform. So we are looking at those numbers because sometimes we aren't getting the engagement as much, but we can see that it's being seen, which is important to us at the stage that we're at. But we also see it as, the engagement, as I talked about, with who we're actually connecting to both on social media with direct messages from the clubs and societies and the other relationships that we're building. So that's how we're looking at it.
And Elysha, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, sure. Well, especially in pre-COVID days, bums on seats, attendance numbers were pretty important. A lot of things shifted online, of course, in the last 2 years. So online attendance has been crucial, especially as we do record and share things afterwards as well. We do track social media and online engagement quite closely, so comments, likes and shares and trends in that space. And we're always interested when we have new audiences come along. So if we have an event and somebody says, oh, I've never even been here before, I see that as a measure of success.
Very good. Okay, I'm sure there are many more questions, but it is time for morning tea. Thank you all. Can we all thank again our three speakers? Thank you.